everybody, and happy Earth Day 2020. As you may know, this is the 50th anniversary of the very first Earth Day, so it is an extra special holiday this year. My name is Talula Thibault, and I will be moderating this Q&A discussion today. I am a senior at the University of Miami, double majoring in ecosystem science, policy, and geography, and I am currently interning with the Office of Sustainability. I also served as the chair for the Eco Board of our student government, which serves to implement green initiatives on our campus. I am excited to welcome you to our panelists today. We have Esber. Esber, would you like to give a brief introduction about yourself? Esber, you might have to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to join this exciting panel today on Earth Day. Happy Earth Day, everyone. I'm Esber Andiroglu. I'm an associate professor of practice at College of Engineering in Department of Civil Architectural and Environmental Engineering. And I also hold a secondary appointment at School of Architecture. I am also the Director of Master of Science in Construction Management Program, which heavily focuses on sustainability and resiliency and in the development of next generational construction professionals with focus on sustainability.
Great, thank you, Esber. Xavier, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Talula, thanks so much for moderating, and I also thank you for all the work you did prior to today in trying to make an actual Earth Day on the patio. I know that you and your board and all the students at the University of Miami were so happy to participate at our beloved U in hands-on activity. Clearly, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and we have to do it through this new digital process. But I just personally wanted to thank you. As you know, I am professor of practice in the Department of Art and Art History, and my practice uses art's elasticity so that we can work in an interdisciplinary way to solve problems, and my particular focus is the environment.
Thank you. Welcome, Xavier. Joanna, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Joanna Lombard. I'm a professor in the School of Architecture, and I have a joint appointment in the Department of Public Health Sciences at the Miller School of Medicine. And this year I'm also an Addis Scholar, so I was happy to hear, Talula, about your work in that joint degree, and it's great to be here with all of you this morning. Well, afternoon now.
Thank you, Joanna. And last but not least, we have Brian. Would you mind giving a brief introduction?
Hi, yes. My name is Brian Soden. I'm a professor of atmospheric science at the Rosenstiel School. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. I do, my main area of research is in climate and climate change. So I'm happy to be part of the panel.
Great. Well, thank you to all our panelists and welcome to our attendees. As you know, this session is called Questions about Climate Change, Sustainable Development, and COVID-19. So while the chats portion of this Zoom call is currently off, the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen is open. So if you have any inquiries that you would like to be discussed today, you can go ahead and type those in and we will be answering those. So to get started, COVID-19 shows us that when faced with an invisible enemy, humans are able to connect, unite, and act quickly. Don't you think climate change needs the same kind of mobilization? Xavier, let's start with you.
Well, the coronavirus is invisible, but COVID-19 isn't. And I think that's why we respond. COVID-19 obviously is the disease caused by an invisible virus. Climate change is invisible. COVID-19 brought us to light. I think our task is to let humanity understand that just as an invisible virus can have profound, impact and unleash incredible suffering, so can invisible particles in our atmosphere that we pump up there through fossil fuels. So I think that what this pandemic does is two things. It shows us our vulnerabilities. It shows us how something that's invisible can really impact us and how we haven't been prepared. Everything from food insecurity that we fear from the very obvious, and how does the food get from the grocery shelves to us or into the grocery shelves or in the various agricultural sectors that are being stopped because of infection. It also exposes the vulnerability at the economic level, right? Those that have the ability to do Instacart have better ways of responding to this crisis than those who don't. And there's other structural issues, the most obvious being access to healthcare. So it exposes that, but it also, on the positive side, shows us that we can unify, right, in the moment. Clearly, government hasn't responded as quickly as it should have, but it did give us 2 trillion and now 500 billion to respond to it. The kind of urgency that this pandemic brought forced them to respond again because it was visible, because people were dying, because the stock market collapsed. Well, climate change will bring about all those horrible things and more, the climate crisis. We just need to work as a society to let our policymakers understand that urgency. And I'll talk about it a little bit more in the panel, but through my art, I have tried in a myriad of ways to make the invisible visible, to show you that sea level rise is coming, to show you that the aquifer beneath our feet is getting salinated, to show us that we're in the middle of a 6th mass extinction, right? So I think the pandemic exposes our vulnerability clearly, but it also shows us a path on how we can literally unite and most importantly, how one person can make a difference by infecting others if you choose to connect, or by protecting others if you choose to shelter. So I think that that's what we need to look at as we walk into this pandemic.
Exactly. Great. Joanna, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I think that another angle on this is that if we look at the responses, we see how varied they are by people and place and locations. And full disclosure, I happen to be working on a climate research team that's hyperlocalism, because we've taken the point of view that in fact, there are realms of action that are as small as individuals and neighborhoods, and there are great varieties among those. And because of these differences, the kinds of actions that are appropriate to one are not necessarily appropriate to the other. I think that the failures and successes that we're seeing in the way we're dealing with the pandemic shows us that there's a real need for clear information at the level that we need to make decisions. And then those decisions need to be made at individual levels, as Xavier described, an individual level to shelter, but understanding how you're nested in larger communities and understanding, for example, if you're able to do this and how you do this and how it's different in one neighborhood versus another. And then the authorities that we work with, the institutions that we work with, have to be integrated to support these kinds of actions. And I would also say that we need to have a trust. Like, I think one of the things that we see right now is that where we have communities of trust and we can rely on each other, we see better outcomes than those where we have distrust and question others' motives. And I think all of those things are just being revealed to us in such a major way that we can take great lessons from what's happening and begin to apply those to thinking about how we make change in terms of climate response.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a great point about the trust. And I think another question that kind of branches off of that has to do with respect. So Brian, this question will be for you. The economy is on hold. Air pollution is dropping with it, as are associated deaths from cardiovascular diseases and car accidents. Is there a possibility for nations to take lessons and try and bring structural change to our economy to be more respectful of the planet and people's well-being?
Yeah, I think one of the silver linings from this event and the quarantining that everybody has been doing is that when everybody is staying at home and not traveling and not commuting, you've seen this dramatic reduction in air pollution. The air is cleaner, the water is cleaner. And I know personally, I found that now that I've been forced to work from home, there's actually a lot of things that I can do from home that's actually better than when I would go into the office and do it. So I hope, maybe one of the things that can come out of this is maybe a greater appreciation for our ability to work virtually, work remotely, not have to do so much traveling and commuting, because that's a huge source of not just air pollutants, but also greenhouse gases. It's about, for in the US, it's about a quarter of our greenhouse gas emissions. So, we don't have to quarantine to the extent we're doing now. But even just, working from home maybe one day a week or maybe two, as much as two, if that works. Not only am I finding there's things that I can do that's more efficient, everything from conferences to collaborations with people all around the world, to we held a virtual open house at the Marine School on Monday. That was amazing. Over 300 students attended. And we're going to do that, no matter, even when things go back to normal. So there's things we can do that, lessons we can learn from this that can make us both more efficient and also have a positive impact on the environment, and also help flatten the curve for global warming.
Definitely. Esber, would you like to elaborate on that?
One thing I see coming out through all this experience is so many different models. Often when we are conducting research, or those of us who are engaged in various levels of research investigations, we look at modeling our predictions and outcomes. I think, there's going to be so many opportunities that will, in the form of lessons learned or samples that are emerging out of this few weeks or months of quarantine period. And often when we are tackling research questions, we're finding that interdisciplinary approach is really what's needed, especially in the case of climate change challenges, when we are responding to climate change impacts. And how does an interdisciplinary team work together? Some of us, Joanna, your team as well, under the ULING project, we're in this where we, at times, a struggle. How do we function as interdisciplinary research teams? And then we take, what we propose to communities to apply to find solutions. And we always have various struggles to getting the buy-in of the stakeholders, the community residents, or our research partners. But yet, under these circumstances recently in this epidemic, look how quickly we all kind of came together, and we are abiding by the guidelines of the quarantine, and we are finding creative solutions, and we are quickly modeling outcomes and proposing what's the next steps. So I think there's going to be a lot of lessons for us to draw from this and apply when we go back to normal life later on, drawing from this experience as a result of these past few weeks or months, and in the months ahead, actually.
Definitely. So speaking of that unity, that is something I've also noticed that's really nice to see the community come together, but at a distance, see people waving on the streets more and being friendlier, but in solidarity with what we're dealing with. So do you think that, and Joanna, this question is for you, is there a new sort of thinking as a result of this pandemic?
I think, it's interesting, Talula. I wonder what the other panelists think about this, because I think it challenges many of our assumptions about what sustainability means. If you're just thinking from an environmental perspective, for example, there's a lot of argument against urban sprawl, for example, and greater density in cities. That makes sense. Urban sprawl doesn't provide the basics of life. People have to drive everywhere. We know that's a bad thing. But if you get to Brian's comment about, well, sometimes you can actually do a lot from where you are, that's really true for those of us that are in places, where where we live is pleasant and you can go outside, and for people who are jammed in cities and, you know, it's really tough right now. Like, where can you go? You can't go in a public space. You can't go out for a walk. So I think a lot of designers, urban planners are starting to say, okay, what's that other solution? Like, is there a kind of best model? Is it the 5-minute walk? It's like Galina Takieva's sprawl repair, which essentially said every neighborhood should have a kind of center and everybody should be able to walk there. And it wasn't so much arguing for density as it was for a kind of mix of uses that everyone could reach on foot. So I wonder if this is going to ask us to rethink some of the things that we've accepted as being part of daily life. Because it's certainly, there's nothing about this that's encouraging anybody to take public transit or to do, you know, to spend a lot of time in close spaces together. In fact, we're going in the opposite direction. So how we align that with our responsibility toward climate, I think is interesting. I'd be interested to hear what the rest of you have to say on that one.
Xavier, would you like to tackle that?
Yeah, so we're talking about new ways of thinking. I think one new way of thinking is how interconnected we are. We knew this. We knew that we're in a global interconnected society. We just didn't understand until, you know, the reagents that you need for a testing swab come from a place somewhere else and you can't get to. You know, in other words, we now see how our supply chains, how our systems are so absolutely interconnected. So I think it brings that. I also think that it also demonstrates how connected we are as a people. I think that too many thought, oh, it's in China, right? Like, it's, you know, SARS was in China, it's in China, it doesn't impact us. That there was this almost tribalism to who we were as people, and that down to the neighborhood level. We here in Miami are looking at sort of a strata of, well, I'm younger and I'm not as vulnerable, but except that the younger are connected to older. So all of a sudden, I think all these ways of thinking about ourselves and what groups, you know, we belong in are all dissolving in and of the other. So I think that that's a new way of thinking, a new paradigm, a new understanding of who we are. Your generation's so into social media, I think, gets that, but even within your generation, there are strata of who you interact with. I think what this has shown you is that how vulnerable we are because of our interdependence. And if you just keep on looking in that direction, I think that makes sense. The other way of thinking, and I think this is where I do find it problematic, is that I do think that right now we're all having these thoughts because literally we are sheltered in place and we're in the middle of the pandemic and we don't know how this is going to end, but it will end. And when it ends, we as humans have a wonderful way of forgetting about what just happened. We have a wonderful way of acting as if we almost got into a car crash. We survived it, we didn't. The car didn't even nick us. Once we get our heart rate back down, we keep on driving as if that never happened, right? And we go back to our old ways. So what I hope that happens is that through this process that we're enduring now, a process that will have impacts and after effects for a long, long time, that we don't forget about the lessons learned while we were here, on how governments became or tried to become more authoritarian, on how people who didn't have access to resources or healthcare were more vulnerable, how we were impacted, where we thought we were safe, how we thought that all we did was take care of those people in our insular family, in our household, we were fine, that it didn't matter what the rest of the world happened, that the pandemic impacts you more if everyone else around you is also sick. So what I'm getting at is that I think that in the most profound way, I hope that this pandemic does force us to think differently, to think about ourselves vis-a-vis one another, and to think of ourselves also in the context of the environment. Deforestation would have upset you because greenhouse gases don't get photosynthesized in a forest. But deforestation also makes animals flee their habitat into spaces and places where there are weakened animals that allow for the transmission of disease because they're in habitats and in connection with people that they would have otherwise not been in connection with. So all of a sudden, I hope this pandemic helps you realize that, yeah, climate change, climate crisis, human impacts, changes to the natural order that we have co-evolved with as a species in this planet does have consequences, and that we as a society, through our personal actions, but also through those we elect as our policymakers, need to live in tune with nature and need to be respectful of that. That's a very big, complex lesson to learn, but I think that the paralysis that we have seen here in our nation, our ability to act, to be, to do, will hopefully be a lesson that we take as we reflect on this. And specifically the students at the University of Miami who are basically having classes the way you and I are speaking right now. This moment, I think, explains to them the power and the role that they have in being agents of that change, as through their learning and their careers, they begin to create a world that makes them, their children, and their grandchildren less vulnerable than you and I are today.
Yes.
That's a new way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned a few good points there. One, just we need more people to know what's going on. We need people to be active and to want to make that change. But you also brought up how a lot of people my age are engaging more with the social media around this issue. I know I was on Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook today, and all three of my feeds were just filled with people celebrating the earth, posting pictures of plants. But it made me fearful that there could be some greenwashing from this. Some people saying, oh, look, the planet's taking care of itself. We're fine. Mother Nature's just going to bounce back because we're staying at home. So I'm curious for any of you who want to answer this. Do you think that the social media is going to help or to hinder us? And do you think that people are going to take climate change more lightly and less severely just from seeing people post about it?
Well, I would hope they would take it more seriously. Just, I would think if anything, this pandemic has shown us it's kind of a really bad idea to go into a crisis like this without any plan or preparation. And so just kind of going in and winging it and, isn't a good idea. And also to sort of trust science to help make that plan, right? So, yeah, I think we've really, been able to appreciate both of those aspects and need to plan ahead. And we're still kind of struggling to come up with a plan of how do we, start to reopen? When do we reopen? How do we, how does that process all work? And I'm still confused about it. I don't know what the plan is, but it would be nice, just to have some certainty about things and know what to expect. And I think this, a big part of the anxiety and stress that people experience is just not knowing what to expect in the future. And, science can help us, both develop plans, both for adaptation to mitigation. And so I'd hope we'd at least better appreciate that and recognize the need for that.
Fingers crossed, yes.
Just to say really quickly, Talula, I just want to jump in on Brian for 1 minute. And I think we've encouraged a lot of people to go into epidemiology. So that is a pretty good thing. I mean, I think there is actually a hunger for facts, and the social media, I think, has been good. I mean, some of the best things I've seen have been, ER doctors in, New York telling what's happening in their experiences. And I think that those kind of people-to-people communications that you then go and research, like, okay, what did this person just say? And how does that impact what I'm doing? I think that's all been really tremendous. And my hope is that this generates a whole new generation, inspires a lot of kids to become scientists and to take on these issues.
Thank you, Joanna.
I want to quickly add that, us humans, it's in our nature that we respond and we unify to fear and to incentives. When we are incentivized, we can get together very quickly. And when we're fearful, we also unite and respond and, find solutions. So COVID-19 is a perfect example of that right now. So how do we take that and apply again as a model to climate change, the response to climate change challenges moving forward? And often the way we respond, look, just this week I received a new publication, for example, that talked about ideal relative humidity ratios for not transmitting COVID-19. So all of a sudden, certain type of humidity levels that we perceived as uncomfortable appeared to be more favorable to stop transmission of a virus like COVID-19. So something like that, to me, can become an incentive from a design perspective when we're relating to dehumidification levels in built environment, for example, which especially in our region, contribute to such increased energy demand from buildings. All of a sudden, it can become an interesting discussion point for property owners, managers, the stakeholders, the end users of built environment. So again, opportunities like that are going to be emerging out of this experience that we're going through, that we can certainly, those of us engaged and are professionals in these fields, the responsibility will be on us to go along with social media and other educational platforms to get this across and demonstrate how, the parallels between these situations. So I think lots and lots of opportunities are going to be emerging in months and years ahead following this experience, that I think it can be very positive.
So Esber, construction is still going on at the U. Do you want to discuss that at all and maybe talk about if there are opportunities during this quarantine time to do some resilient public work?
Absolutely. I think, just this week, I received an email from one of my students who is just graduating, but is already full-time employed for Florida, with Florida Department of Transportation. All of a sudden, he's telling me he's so busy, although he's working remotely, because a lot of road construction projects are being put forward now during the lower traffic impact that is ongoing. So around us, making those type of projects far more efficient, less disruptive to everyday life, and more economical, really, more affordable even to roll out. So there are all kinds of opportunities like that, really. Look, we hear quite a bit on about age infrastructure, water, wastewater infrastructure. Broward County, Miami-Dade County, a lot of those projects are ideal projects for putting forward right now during these times. They will not only keep the economy alive and moving and many people employed, but we will also get things done during this time rather than just being, working remotely from home with limited capacity. So lots of opportunities. I'm all for that.
Good. Hopefully lots of productivity is still going
Yes.
on. So Brian and then Xavier, if you don't mind answering, the permafrost is currently melting as a result of climate change, and with it comes 15,000-year-old frozen pathogens being released into our atmosphere. Can climate change cause more pandemics, do you think, and why is that?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't thought about that, and I don't know the answer to that question. Certainly as the permafrost melts, we get more methane released into the atmosphere, and that's a big concern for further amplifying the warming. But in terms of pathogens themselves, I don't know the answer to that, but it's a great question. Maybe Xavier does.
No, I mean, I've heard of that, but I don't have any research to sustain it. But I think the broader consideration matters, right? What does that mean when the permafrost is melting? That means that ecosystems, the way we know them to be, the way that we as this society of ours lives, those ecosystems are collapsing, right? So the permafrost melts because the Arctic is getting warmer. The Arctic is getting warmer because, of course, fossil fuels are creating more greenhouse gases. What are the impacts of a melting Arctic? What happens with our extreme weather? What happens to the salinity of the water up in the Arctic? What happens to as the glaciers melt? What happens with sea level rise? All of these clearly resonate with people at every point on Earth, whether the climate patterns now cause more drought, whether the sea level rise drowns your city, whether the ocean warmth creates the bleaching of corals with a changing climate. Systems that we naturally were part of and living in synchrony with, like one big organism called life. What we have done since the Industrial Revolution is literally cut limbs off of that life form, that life. And as that happens, the organism, life on this planet, all of us interacting with one another, starts weakening. So part of what you're seeing across our Earth are dramatic changes. And clearly, the more human encroachment on wilderness, the more ecosystems collapse, the more animals become weakened as their habitats move to different latitudes, the more in contact we're going to come with pandemics. At the same time that we continue creating monocultures and more globalized systems of feeding one another, and at the same time that we as a population grow and approximate 8 billion people. All of this at a time when we as a society are vulnerable to climate change, extreme drought in some areas that cause wildfires, extreme weather, stronger storms, rising seas, economic collapse at the water's edge, fisheries diminishing, people's real estate values pummeling. I'm talking through time. Clearly that's going to unleash a lot of damage to our planet. And I understand, Talula, today we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the beginning of a movement where 20 million Americans took to the streets and demanded from government that they stop smog, that they stop polluted rivers, that they, through their actions, the very first Earth Day on April 22nd, 1970, ensured that 3 years later we had an Endangered Species Act, that we had a Clean Air Act, that we had a Clean Water Act. These were responses that government enacted because citizens rallied. I think in these 50 years, we have lost our way. We have not given, I was 5 years old when that happened. I was in kindergarten. I was a 5-year-old boy. I'm 55-year-olds now. I cannot promise the 20-some thousand kindergartners in Miami-Dade County today that I am going to deliver to them a better 2070, a better Earth Day 2070, an Earth Day that they can celebrate. I know that your Instagram feed is full of beautiful pictures of plants and stuff like that. And I get it. A time like this, you want to celebrate the beauty of Earth. And it feels like greenwashing at a moment like this. Clearly, Earth is beautiful and nature is beautiful, but it's also severely threatened. And I think what this conversation, you asked me about pandemics, is about a collapse, right? A collapse, a systemic collapse of the natural, and by natural, I mean nature, the natural systems that give life to this planet. And I think we need to resolve today on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day that you and I, all of our U of M students, all of us will work, again, inspired by the catastrophe of this pandemic, the lack of belief in science until this moment when now, wow, science really matters. The lack of planning until this moment where, oh my God, you can't wing it, as Brian just said, right? The lack of responsiveness to the climate crisis because it felt that it was too far away. And this pandemic is a consequence of our climate crisis, our deforestation, our way of being. That your students, although yes, please post a picture of a flower on Earth Day, but you know what? It's also time to act and to commit our lives to making a difference. And just to wrap this up really quickly, for every picture of a beautiful flower, and I love flowers, there's also a picture on your newsfeed of a health worker with PPE, exhausted, and you thanking them for being heroes. There is also among your generation an incredible amount of compassion for the people who are suffering today. So what you just need to do is match that compassion to action and understand that all of this is connected to the way we deal with our planet and our environmental issues, because everything is interconnected.
Yes. And for our viewers out there who maybe aren't from the Coral Gables community, I think the compassion that Xavier was talking about is really exemplified on a lot of front doors and windows of homes around here. A lot of the children have been putting up little pictures of hearts and thank you notes to our doctors and nurses. So that's been very heartwarming to see. Next question is for Esber and then Joanna, if you want to answer that as well. With Saudi Arabia inundating the world with its reserve of crude oil, the barrel prices have sunk in the last 3 weeks. Some are predicting the end of the pricey shale and tar sand extraction, like the one Canada and the US depend on because of low profitability. Is this opportunity for banks and nations to invest in renewable energy?
Absolutely. This presents it. Again, earlier I mentioned that we respond really well to fear and to incentives. So this is an excellent example of being incentivized. Investing in renewable energy, we shouldn't really need, as Xavier mentioned, the dire state of, where we're headed or where we've been in recent years, as the impacts of global warming is experienced. But now this actually helps and sets the right platform for those types of incentives to definitely move forward and gain support and partnerships of multi-dimensional contributors towards that effort. So I definitely very much for such initiative. And I think one thing that is also to our advantage, I'm going to go back a little bit to what Xavier was saying from 50 years ago to today. One thing that's to our advantage today is the knowledge base, the innovations, the scientific knowledge that we've gained compared to 50 years ago. So we're really well equipped and well armed to tackle these type of solutions. So it's a little while ago I was mentioning to some of you about my course in sustainable construction, where my students are tackling a community project. And on the renewable energy side, there has been so many investigations that they're coming up with. So we have several multi-dimensional opportunities with aggregated benefits that we can really start investing in and taking this step forward. A lot of these efforts can not only work towards energy for fulfilling our increased needs on energy from a better sources, but at the same time they can have aggregated benefits, for example helping with water purification efforts at the same time. One thing I'm going to add quickly in here, because I'm very passionate about water as well, although your question was energy, but these are water and energy are very closely tied together. Today on Earth Day, I'm very excited to also report that we just launched a new global organization called One Water Academy. I encourage everyone to join, sign up, and become a member. You can see them on onewateracademy.org as the website. And a lot of these cross-disciplinary discussions are, again, part of these type of efforts. So I think I deviated from your question a little bit, Talula, but at the same time, I want to emphasize renewable energy is a very, at times, as much as we all want to do it, often we run into too many issues carrying it out in big scale, large scale. And partly because the policies and the regulatory bodies that are involved in regulating energy become an obstacle. But opportunities, like as you mentioned today, can become a tool for overcoming those type of obstacles as a result of generating incentives for the bigger, broader stakeholders to demand this type of action. Joanna, any thoughts on this?
I think you've been pretty comprehensive. What I might add is that the building industry is definitely shifting. We know how to, I mean, most of us could be living in buildings that essentially operate off the grid. We could be recycling our own water. We could be using solar energy. The independence is entirely possible, and I think for students who are graduating and interested in, looking out for jobs in this world, I think that following up with some of the renewable energy companies is a really great opportunity. The other thing I would say is that by cleaning up the renewable energies tend to be cleaner energy. I think about Louisiana, which has Cancer Alley, that area where the oil industry has been. I think of the marine disasters that have occurred through drilling and leakage. And I would say that there are so many reasons that we should be committing to this kind of renewable energy now. And Esber's right, we have the capacity to do it. I think that students will see a lot of job opportunities opening up in these areas. So that's probably a pretty good outcome.
Thank you for that tip. Viewer question now comes in for Brian. How do you see this affect the wildlife around the world, short-term and long-term? Is there anything on policies and support coming in from our government and society?
Well, yeah, just the anecdotal evidence we're all seeing on social media and the news of as we quarantine, the Mother Nature is getting out of its hiding places and coming out and being more prominent. So, that's just a consequence of smaller human presence out there, but also probably benefited by less air pollution, maybe less water pollution as well. I suspect that that will end shortly after we finish quarantining. And so, as Xavier and other panelists have been mentioning, there's a need to, sit back and look at, so now we've done this, unplanned experiment, and we've, really been made aware of what our impact is. We have to see a very tangible evidence of how people are impacting the environment. It's great to see all of these things, but what can we do to try to sustain that? I haven't heard a lot of conversation about that yet. And obviously their first priority is to address the pandemic that's going on, and rightfully so. But there's also here an opportunity that I hope we don't miss, of a chance to really look at what we're doing and really evaluate what, we have these essential employees, but what of our tasks are really essential in terms of having to commute into work or whatever, what are the things or behavior that we were previously doing really was essential, and what is worth maybe changing in order to have a positive impact on the environment. I haven't heard of a lot of discussion about those things yet, but I think it's a great opportunity to try to start those.
Talula, I don't know what you think about this. I'd be interested in your thoughts as well as the panelists, but one concern I have is that for people who can quarantine and have jobs where you can work at home, this is one experience. For people who have lost jobs, who have no idea when they're going to have the next paycheck, who, life has essentially shut down, it's almost setting up again that kind of dichotomy of the environment versus the economy, or the quarantining public health issues versus the economy. And I think that what you're saying, Brian, is that we need to figure out a way to navigate that so that it's multiple benefits and not hardships. But I would want to put out there that we have to be really conscious of the incredible hardship that so many people are undergoing right now. And I wouldn't want people to think that those hardships are somehow, we're happy that they're benefiting the birds, because I'm very mindful of the fact that we need to move all this forward together, and we can't leave anybody behind, and the hardships are very real.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the economy and ego just kind of needs to be blended more. We need to be more eco-active. I work 2 part-time jobs outside of school. I lost one of my jobs, and actually, interestingly enough, the one that I still have is related to helping the environment, so there you go. A lot of discussion that I've heard in circles with groups my age is largely in favor of circular economy. So not just build, and put out all this output out into the world and create this excess and this waste that we can't handle or get rid of, but just focusing more on reusing, reducing, and using what we have, not depleting our resources. So I think a lot of the discussions that I've been having with university students is very promising, and it makes me optimistic. And hopefully some of our other panelists are hopeful as well.
Well, a lot of the conversations that we're having are about technology and science that exists. As Joanna said, we have the capacity, the ability to do that. The issue is, do we have the will? And again, as Joanna said, there's usually this false dichotomy that exists. I think that this pandemic puts it in perspective. I talked to you a little bit earlier about compassion, right? It's compassion for all the suffering. It's all of us that move the needle on public policy, and it's public policy that decides whether or not to invest in clean energy, because right now the fossil fuel industry is being subsidized. That's policy. That's our government basically subsidizing the kind of fossil fuels that debilitate forests, debilitate ecosystems as the planet gets warmer, causing pollinators and birds and their migration patterns not to be in sync with what the plant world is doing, because there's seasons are shifting, ecologies are shifting, and ecosystems are collapsing. That, what I just described to you, is exactly how those organisms become more vulnerable and become vectors of disease. The warmer it gets in Miami, the more likely that diseases that were in the tropics now come through mosquitoes in Miami and provide and infect Miami, but also places north of here. Like that, pandemics through other vectors, whether it's through mass agriculture, whether it's through pigs or cows or chickens, in time, the more we disturb natural processes, and I understand there's 8 billion of us almost to feed, but the more we disturb natural processes, and the way we do it best, or in the most obscene way, is by what we do to our planet. That methane that Brian was talking about is 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide. What we were worried about is there some organism that froze 10,000 years ago and is now being exposed as the ice melts is something going to happen as those microbes turn that organic matter into methane. Well, whether it happens there or whether it happens at the other side deep down near the equator as systems collapse, in one way or another, all these systems are interconnected. So what we need to understand as a society is, unless we get back in tune with nature, unless we reverse the trend that we're in, and that can only happen with public policy, because it's the elected officials that decide whether to incentivize clean energy or not. And as Esber said, we are driven by fear. So let the fear of this pandemic, let the pain of being unemployed, let the suffering of your mother in a nursing home, let the fact that all of your savings and your nest egg has just evaporated in your 401ks, transform that suffering, that fear, that pain into action that demands that the policy that's going to navigate us through the next decades is in line with what's for the public good and not for a select few of special interests, which is how policy happens in our nation today. Those are the lessons to be learned as we exit this pandemic.
Yes, absolutely. Question for all of you. What is your advice to students and pretty much anyone? How do you think we can best solve this? And what are your tips on maybe some sustainable living or for job seekers? What is your advice and message to everyone?
I'll start because I'm going to say almost like don't follow what everyone has been doing thus far. So start fresh. We are at a time where, as we said, there's lots and lots of opportunities as a result of emerging innovations, new knowledge, major developments in scientific understanding. And so when you are attempting to find, as the next generation of professionals moving into workforce and attempting to apply solutions or find solutions to these problems that we're discussing, don't be fearful about thinking about new approaches. Take them head on and actually try untried, out-of-the-box solutions. This is all in your hands, and that's what we're promoting also in the way we're attempting to train you currently. So lessons learned from this pandemic experience or various other impacts from climate change. Don't do it the way we've been doing it the past 50 years or 100 years. It's time to come up with new methods, new solutions, apply these innovations that are emerging all the way, and you'll be amazed how empowered you are really, and what you can deliver as a result.
Esber, I think we just lost you.
I think we did.
Joanna, would you like
to?
Okay. No, that's great.
You're back.
I would hesitate to give any advice about this situation, given how complex it is, and the people that I know, and my colleagues in public health and in the med school. I mean, this is, one of them said to me, there will be a time when this will be really interesting to study, but that isn't now. And what I would say is that we need each other, and the relationships we have with each other have probably never been more important. And the opportunity to work together has never been more important. And to the extent that we can do that as often as possible and as much as possible for the maximum amount of good, I would say then we're doing great. Talula, I think you're on mute now.
You're right, you got me. Thank you for that answer, Joanna. Brian, would you like to give some final thoughts on the matter?
I would just echo what Joanna said. it's a tough situation to try to give advice to other people on how to act, but certainly uh, appreciating, you know, friends and family and our interconnectedness and dependence on, you know, other people, our community, and looking out for each other. It's certainly a time to embrace that.
Definitely. Xavier, would you like to give some closing thoughts?
Sure, thank you. First of all, thank you to Talula and for all you and the students, and especially Teddy and his team to put this together to bring Earth Day to life to our students. I think I want to tell the students that, you know, I'm actually humbled to be by these extraordinary faculty members who are taking time to share with them. I want students for you to know that we love you, that we care for you, and that we understand that these are difficult times. We understand that some of you are actually, you know, not in the space and place you need to be, and that there's an incredible amount of compassion and understanding, that we care about you and we want the best for you. We want you to understand that we really don't know what this virus is about. We really don't. It's a new virus, and we still don't know exactly how it is that it is impacting people and causing injury to the body. So please continue to take care of yourselves. You think you're young. I remember being your age. I thought I was immortal. We are not. We are all made of flesh. So please take care of yourselves. I also know that some of you are concerned about your families with all reason, but have faith and have strength. You have a community of people who loved you before you were in Zoom boxes. Those people are still there. Stay connected with them. Insofar as this pandemic, please don't underestimate your power and your agency. You have voice, and you have a way of making sure that you're not victimized by this, but that you can be an agent of change and you can make a difference. As you do that, understand that there's new methodologies, new way of doing things. You're learning them as this happens, the way you take classes and move into a digital space. Take those lessons with you as you innovate in an interdisciplinary way and create a path, and know that we are counting on you and that you are part of the big you.
Thank you so much, Xavier. To all of our panelists and all of our participants, thank you so much for joining. It has been a blast. I hope you have a lovely 50th Earth Day. Go Canes.
Go Canes.